Welcome to the Reclamation Point podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Motown Lee, with my partner,
Dr. Ed Garnes.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry, I was looking at my sweet tea. Sorry.
Hold on. Are you serious? This is what we getting? This is what we getting today? That's the energy you getting today?
No, I'm sorry. You want to start over?
No.
Okay.
No. No do-overs. I cannot believe that you joined the party with such a melancholy Dr. Ed Garnes introduction.
I'm sorry. Hello, this is Dr. Ed Garnes. My radio voice.
So, this is the Reclamation Point podcast. Black men discussing mental health, and everything we talk about, it always goes back to mental health and mental well-being. There has been some things that's going on in our community that we have to discuss, and we have to discuss it in relation to us being black men, our community and our society. I won't even say hip hop, because this brother was just like popular music. We lost another brother recently, with Brother Takeoff from the group Migos. There's just a lot of different things to talk about as it pertains to Takeoff's untimely demise, and some of the things I think that we need to discuss, or I wanted to discuss, was as tragic as it is. Number one, I think that a lot of people blame hip hop and blame music. So I wanted to discuss that, and I also want to discuss, why is it okay for our brothers why is it okay to plaster this man's tragic demise all over the internet and be used for entertainment purposes? And we have been so desensitized by these tragedies and these and matter of fact, PTSD. We'll begin with Brothers Takeoff's demise, but we want to discuss PTSD in our community, because every time we talk about PTSD, it's always in relation to the men and women who've honored this country and served and done tours. And them doing their tours in the military, and they've seen some things, and they come back, and some has been desensitized, but some has been truly affected, and it would affect them for the rest of their lives. So taking away a child, a young, because most in military, they're 18. Most combat soldiers are 18, 19.
Yeah, they put the young folks on the front line.
And so you're taking these people, when you're putting them in combat to fight for our country, and you think about how it affects people, right? And they come back with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that in relation to...
From a black perspective, or what are you looking for?
Not even from a black perspective, but let's talk about it from it's a black perspective, but the inner city perspective. When you look at Takeoff, and you look at a lot of brothers and a lot of sisters who've met their demise, and we've seen these traumatic things in our community, it affects us in different ways, but we don't talk about these things. We just deal with them. For me, clearly I'm a black man, as you can clearly see that, but I'm a black man from the inner city. I grew up, I split between Compton, California, and a place called Rialto, California. In Compton, California, we don't have to run the history. You know the history of Compton. You pretty much know what you're gonna get. And then my mom, to giving her credit, she thought that she was moving me to another place, a suburbs, Atlanta, different opportunities, because there was no internet. She didn't know. She just thought that she was moving me somewhere better. The problem with that was everybody's parents at that time thought that they were doing the exact same thing. And it was a bunch of badass kids from different places living in one place now. And it was like a war zone, right? Because people who were separate and segregated in certain areas, now we all live in the same area, and essentially, you know, we face the same or more atrocities growing up that I did in Compton. Actually, I faced more because it was just worst. So not just the violence, the drugs, the just the poverty, everything, right? And so from birth to 19, basically, sometimes even more, it's 11 and came back. So from birth to today, I've dealt with the violence, these traumatic experiences, and it took me from all of that time to February of this year, 2022, to actually find a way to deal with that. And I had no idea all of those years I was dealing with PTSD.
Yeah.
You know, have no idea. So when we empathize with the soldiers, and rightfully so, but we don't understand, or we don't address the PTSD and the traumatic experiences in our community, and we just pile it on,
Mm-hmm.
and just deal with it. Then we see somebody like Takeoff, and we're able to post this online and watch it, and people watching it for entertainment purposes. It's tragedy, and then it hits, and then 2 days later we go on with our lives. And, you know, a lot of people and a lot of things get blamed. They blame music. They blame politicians. They blame everything. But I want to get to the good stuff, the PTSD, and dealing with these traumatic experiences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think several things. I mean, we talked about this on the Bear episode. Trauma is really just an emotional response to something you've experienced or witnessed, and PTSD is that constant difficulty in trying to reclaim yourself after experiencing or dealing with trauma. So when we look at PTSD, one of the major things that we deal with is flashbacks. You ever had, like, we call them flash, but I mean, you ever had like a memory based on personal experience that something happens and you go right back to that experience, mm-hmm. right? And so flashbacks, we know it sleep disturbances involves PTSD, but one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is avoidance. So when you're dealing with PTSD, you are trying to avoid all of those particular triggers, right? And so when we look at Takeoff, when we look at Black Life, how we even got the title Reclamation Point is that when you're dealing with trauma, there's a reclamation project that is happening constantly of you trying to reclaim your dignity and humanity. And as for Black people, limited socioeconomic status, money, access to power is on top of all of these particular traumas, right? So there comes a point where you have to reclaim that. So there becomes a reclamation point. Your reclamation point led you to therapeutic intervention. The reason why we as a community don't look at mental health as an intervention because of the advertisement. It's like we see an old white brother in the corner talking about Freud, and we don't want any parts of that. Mm-hmm. When throughout our life, we have had therapeutic conversations. Those therapeutic conversations are really giving you coping strategies. When you talk to elders, when you talk to people at the barbershop, when you talk to grandparents and OGs, they're really giving you coping strategies. We're just not naming that. But what has happened, cultural productions like music, art, paint, whatever you're doing that's a cultural production is reflective of the value system that you embrace. So if we as black people decide to love each other, we decide to see the humanity of other brothers, then our music will reflect that, right? But what happens with cultural production is once you involve money, it gets compromised. And so what has happened is that we have made it comfortable to be desensitized to our own dehumanization process. And so what you see happening in music and culture is the dehumanization process that has been historic against black people. Because if I can dehumanize you and you not see the other humanity in your other brother, then I can control you. And so what ends up happening a lot of times, when you're disenfranchised, you want proximity to power, which is money, right? You want the money because you think that the money is going to solve everything. But if you're not whole from a psychological standpoint and a spiritual standpoint, that's how we get into problems. And the tragedy of losing this brother is that how we lost him. If you wrote the rap, it would go number one. How he passed is almost in every rap song that we think about. But it's not the music. It's because of where we are with our value systems, and we have labels that constantly promote our own dehumanization.
And you know what? It's something you said, and I was a victim of that. How he passed, and then also the money, because immediately people went to, he had the money, should have had security, should have had this, that, and the other, right? And when you look at that, the point that you made about money, I think that mental health and PTSD in our community, for people who perceive others as financially comfortable,
you ain't supposed to have no problem.
Exactly. But when Big said more money, more problems, and I don't think people understood that, because with the more money, more problems, unless you deal with, you still have those. PTSD isn't something that you can buy away from or you can buy yourself out of. Just because you can live in a community and see a lot of people die. You could have been abused. You can have somebody you love be addicted to drugs, and then somebody comes and they say, you know what, Ed, you won the $1 billion lottery. I've given you $1 billion. Mm-hmm. That can buy your residence, but it won't wash away all those thoughts. It won't wash away PTSD.
And it doesn't buy you a new value system, because me and you happen to love black people. We put our minds towards progressive ideas. You give us $1 billion, then our cultural productions are going to reflect those values. So we are expecting people to get money and then change their value system. When you get money, your value system is already corrupted, because in America you are told that money is happiness. Why when people get money are they so unhappy? Because they have had to compromise aspects of themselves. And as black people, we have to sometimes compromise other black people to maintain this sense of worth.
I believe that, and I also believe I do. On the flip side, I do believe a lot of people, when they get money, the unhappiness comes from a place where they thought that when you're growing up in an impoverished community,
yes,
your whole goal is to make money and get out of this, right?
Exactly.
So everybody tells you the money is actually going to solve your problems. Mm-hmm. It's not. It'll solve your financial problems,
Yes, preach.
but it does not solve the problems. I'll get all right. So we always talk about. We always get personal. One thing about the Reclamation Point podcast is I'm actually, for me personally, I'm doing a podcast with my friend. Right,
Preach.
this is my brother, and the mics are on, the cameras is on, but it's just me and my brother in here, and so I can have a conversation with my brother. So as it relates to the money, PTSD, and the problems, the other day, last week, I suffered for the first time in my life an anxiety attack, right? A panic attack.
Damn.
And I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
I didn't know what was going on, right? My entire life, not my entire life, but a lot of people, they tend to lean on me, right? Especially now, with a certain level of financial comfort and everything. Before, and I've always belt the bore the burden. I was okay with that, right? If I got it, everyone else has it. So, normally after the success of our festival, One Music Fest, sometimes I just I kind of take a few days to reset.
As well, you should.
Because it's just mentally and physically draining. All day there's problems. There's all of these things. There's all these pieces and puzzles running backstage that's going on that you are trying to put in place. There's requests.
People want stuff.
But there's also simple things as in people excited for you and they want to take pictures and have these conversations. And so for however long, but even for those 3 days, those 2 or 3 days, I have to be on. And so after that, I'm mentally drained. When it comes to One Music Fest, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. By Monday night, dog, I'm not even, no lie. I'm so exhausted that I think I'm like, damn, do I need to be in a hospital or something? I'm exhausted. Just can't be move and do anything. And so I kind of try to hit the reset button. But with that being said, so you have that. But now you have people who life still goes on, right? And now I'm still getting the calls or the texts I'm going through something, I need you. You know what I mean? And I thought I was like, oh, I'm okay with that. All right. But then it's also, it's just, it could be financial. It could just be people calling me to express their thoughts and their opinions, or it could be them just needing to talk to me as a friend on whatever in relation
Dumping
to
their
that,
stuff on.
you know. So I'm sitting there and I'm getting these calls, I'm getting texts, and dog, I start getting sweaty. I'm like, damn, I'm sweating. And it was but I really wasn't sweating. It felt like I was sweating in sweat balls. Then I started to feel constricted. I felt like the walls were caving in. I'm looking around. I'm like, the walls ain't caving in. But now now it's affecting my breathing. I'm like, but I'm not breathing bad. I'm breathing regular, but I feel like
Yeah.
so. I'm like something going on. Like oh and I'm like damn. So man, I gotta go outside. Let me go for a walk. Let me like shut down and go listen to music, which normally calms me, but none of this was working. And then I was like, you know what? Let me call my partner Ed. But I didn't call you. So this is the first time Ed's hearing about this. So I didn't call you because I think that you sent me a text like the day before and we were talking about something. And I was like, I'd be doing to Ed the exact same thing that I feel. So I didn't call you, right? And I didn't say anything. And so I'm just like, let me breathe. And I realized that what it was that brought it on. I was like, man, like, it was just too much. And I was shook because this has never happened to me ever in life.
What brought you back?
I don't know, man. I just like literally I was literally took a walk and I was skipping through records and none, and it was just this one particular record. It was it's funny because if the record, it was it was like no Vaseline. No, it was Ice Cube, the Ninja You Love to Hate.
Okay, all
right.
right.
And I just went on, and it was just that aggressive release, rapping along with this. I'm walking down Peachtree and I'm rapping along with this record, and I was like, all right, I can breathe now, right? But in the song, when I looked at the ratio to the song, it's like in the hook, everybody's like, F you, Ice Cube. Hey, come on now. Like everyone's saying F you for these multitude of reasons, and he's just accepting it like, yeah, and it's building me, it's making me stronger. Yeah. That honestly is the song that brought me down and out of the having this panic attack. But consequently, it wasn't the song. It was just a multitude of things just that you take on from all of these like years and just that pushed me to that. And I always thought that, I'm like, I can bear it, but not telling, people. And sometimes it becomes unbearable. I realized that that point I gave up too much of myself till I was like, I don't have nothing left. Mm-hmm. So I was empty. And that emptiness caused the panic attack, because I was like, I reached a point where I don't have no more to give. And now I'm panicking, not because I don't feel it, not because I don't feel like I have none left to give, but I don't have anything to give to myself. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't understand it. But essentially it was PTSD. It was essentially these
triggers.
It triggered me, dog.
Yeah. I mean, what you were describing, first of all, I gotta big you up for, we put our business on Front Street. Right. So I appreciate you sharing, because, I knew something that happened. I didn't know all the details, but what you experienced was another reclamation point. We've talked about mental health, but what has happened now is that you recognize that something was off, but you experienced something that you didn't know if you had the resources to deal with. But your self-awareness is very keen now, because you knew something was off. The old Mo, you wouldn't even know. You're like, what is happening?
I'm having a heart attack. Exactly. The big one. I'm coming to join you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, but that's the power of you setting boundaries and being more, open about your own mental health struggles, is that you was able to recognize what was going on. But yes, panic attack is excessive worry. But you were triggered, man. I mean, I think that all of us have had PTSD from the Takeoff situation that has impacted us all. And then, you're the person that's givers. You know, us givers, you know how that giving works. It explodes, man. So, you know, you having a panic attack makes sense because I personally worry about you in One Music Fest because I know the push and pull on you as a person and how people will lean on you during that time period. So, you know, I think that for black men, why it is so problematic for us to continue to hold on to things, I'm guilty of it too, is that it has a cumulative impact. Like, you don't know when it's gonna pop. Like, stress doesn't send text messages. You either have an anxiety attack, you fall out in the store on aisle 2, and you're in the hospital because it has a cumulative impact. So what you reached another reclamation point, my brother. But I went, you know, it's funny because I went through my same thing. You were going through your panic attack, and we both didn't call each other. So
Right.
we both need our butt whooped. We talking about reclamation point. We didn't even call each other. But mine was grief, man. Something really triggered the grief of losing my father, and what I realized, it was PTSD because for the uninformed, I found my brother who passed. We found him dead. I found my father dead. So just imagine they are alive at one point. So just the PTSD of trying to reconcile that, while you were going through your panic attack, I was going through a grief reaction.
And I'm sorry.
And why did we suffer? Because we did not lean on people that we should be talking to. So if anything, learn from our asses, okay?
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. You know
But
what I mean?
I think the reason why we were able to pull ourselves back is that now we have the emotional muscle to know that we need to take a break. So you took a break, I took a break. Probably why we took a break from the podcast. You know what I'm saying? Because we had to get ourselves together. But, you know, I think the beauty in self-discovery is understanding when you're not at your baseline. So I think the important thing to take from this is that we both went through an experience and knew that we had to do something different.
Right. And it's important that when you talk about like your traumatic experiences with your brother and your father, like for me, I literally saw my brother die. He got hit by a car and passed away right in front of me. And as a kid growing up, I never dealt with that, right? Mm-hmm. Growing up, I was taught, I suppressed it for so many years, and I was taught to pray about it. And again, when you talk about PTSD and you talk about things that have grown up as a relation to my best friend, you know, I literally, when he was shot and had to wear, a colostomy bag, a boo-boo bag, basically. Growing up, I knew deaths, people my age, people directly attached to me, just the deaths. Maybe before I was 18, maybe 40, 50. Tragic deaths too, like murders, drug addictions, you know, accidents, things of that nature, right? You just deal with them. You're just taught to deal with them, right? Then that's outside of just everyday violence that was in the community, being shot at, seeing other people shoot. I ain't gonna say, but doing things that were not so right. It's funny because I was having a conversation. I look back at a picture from high school, a high school graduation picture, and in that picture, I think it was roughly, may have been like 100. And my graduation picture, literally graduation night, like the people that were on the row sitting with us, one of the dudes was sitting with us, was the quote unquote murderer, and two of the other people sitting was two of the people he murdered, and the other person was the person that had graduated the year before. And then in our class, like a week or something later, other people essentially would die and pass away violently. And then overall in the picture, out of 300 people, at least like 18, 19 of them had passed away, right? And so you think about that, right? That was so normal. The having somebody, 3, 4 friends, immediate friends, well, 3.5, because I knew one of them. He was friends with my friends, the murderer. He was like my partners. He was cool. He was cool with me, but he was really cool with my partners. So, you know what I mean? Nothing. But having those 4 lives affected, and we was just like, we just dealt with it. Like it wasn't nothing. We went to the funerals and people pulled guns on us at the funeral because my friends were friends with him, but they were also friends with the girls.
It's like trauma
and tragedy, and those things you carry.
Yeah.
And so there's this clip for everybody. There's this clip of Scrappy, Little Scrappy, loving hip hop. There's a clip going around. Ed and I have seen it. We shared it with each other. We talked about it. And I thought it was so powerful and so necessary because Scrappy was talking to his mother, and you see the pain and the frustration, but also you understand like the resiliency of Scrappy and what he's been through. He was talking about growing up in a whorehouse and seeing
trap house,
and trap and all of these things, and how it affects him today in his relationship. And make no mistake, even in the height of his career, I don't think people remember, but Scrappy almost died in Florida. Remember, they tried to kill him. They knocked out all his teeth and all these things. It was a fight in Florida. So you think about these tragedies and you see this clip and and I'm watching this clip and I'm like, wow. And I see myself in Scrappy. Mm-hmm. I see the tragedy, I see the release, and I see how it affects him and brothers and people today. And this being the Reclamation Point podcast, and we have Ed here, let's talk about the tools. And let's talk about some of the things that we can do both professionally, on record, off record, or whatever. How can we deal with PTSD and what advice do we give? First of all, what is it?
Yeah, like I said briefly before, like trauma is, an emotional response to experience something or event that actually happens to you. So you can have vicarious trauma where something happens to you, Mo, and it impacts me. So it can be witnessing or experiencing, and your response to that event is trauma. And PTSD is you constantly mentally trying to reconcile this traumatic event and having flashbacks, things like sleep disturbances, and also avoidance of that particular issue. What does avoidance look like in the experience that you talked about? We go to drugs, we go to violence, right? So to avoid that feeling, it affects our behavior. But one of the things that trauma does is it upsets our core belief system. And so your core belief system is related to your identity, how you look at self, right? So a lot of times when we are trying to navigate trauma, it alters our core belief. So in the case of Scrappy and you and other people, you might have a sense of self that says, my life has no value. Okay? So you develop a negative core belief, my life that has no value. Then what we have to look at, how does that impact thoughts, feelings, behaviors? So if my core belief is that my life has no value, would it make sense that I'm living day to day? Would it make sense that, you know, my thought pattern is self-destruction, that my feelings are depression and anxiety, and then my behavior is that I act out inappropriately in social situations because my core belief is that I do not value myself. So one of the things that we have to really deal with is how trauma impacts our core beliefs and sense of self. And, you know, one of the things that we can do, and one of the things that you now know from that panic attack, you know what your triggers are. So one of the starting places that I would work with a person that is going through trauma is to keep a thought record, right? Trace your thoughts from a 7 to 10 day period and pay attention to what core beliefs happen for you and how that impacts your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors during that time period. And what happens is that when you do that, Mo, you'll say, hey, whenever I'm in a situation where people are leaning on me and I feel no escape, that triggers all of those other traumas. So then by knowing it upsets your core belief system, you're able to go back and say, hey, I need to do these things differently because they will impact my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So that's one thing about trauma, is that it totally impacts our core belief system. So to put it in the terms of black people, James Baldwin talk about black people being in a constant rage most of the time because beyond just the traumas that we experience, we have vicarious trauma through all of the things that we are trying to reconcile in dealing with a white supremacist America. Just being black is traumatic. You know what I'm saying? If me and you went to Chase right now, we'll be looked at as not owning businesses because we are brothers. You know what I'm saying? We have to worry about when we leave this studio being followed by the police. We have to worry about in school being looked at as being inferior and black women being intellectually superior to us, right? So how you deal with trauma is you have to reconcile core beliefs that give you a sense of resiliency. How do we get a sense of resiliency as black people is remembering that we have strengths. Notice how we always talk about, you know, trauma is passed down from generation to generation. Strengths are passed down from generation to generation. And we've talked before about some of these innate strengths we have. I don't know a black person that don't work hard. Resiliency, that's a strength. Tap into that. Improvisation is a strength. Tap into that. Spirituality, being connected to the others. These are principles that Dr. Joe White talked about from black psychology that are innate in our being. So when you are in difficult moments, you don't need to hear more trauma. You need to hear coping strategies. You need to hear resilient stories that give you the internal fortitude to continue. That's what you need when you experience trauma. But what happens is that from a mental health standpoint, that is not given credence in the psych world. All right. So in the psych world, it's about this is your diagnosis, and socioeconomic realities, race, and all those other things don't come into play. And that's why we skate around therapy, because we're not with therapists that understand the black experience, which is why I have my degree now to help black people reconcile that. And it's so traumatic being black sometimes that you know what my degree is in. I go through the same stuff you go through. It doesn't matter about your education. Black life requires a certain sense of resiliency. But I think as men, just being honest that we are struggling and having conversations with other brothers, that's how you get the playbook. You have to have wise counsel that allow you to express yourself uncensored so you can then unravel the things that are going on. So hopefully that was an explanation that was helpful for you.
No. 100% helped. It's helpful, and that's the thing I wanted to make sure that we are with Reclamation Point. We're not those the guys, or we're not ever going to be the people that sit around and complain. We want to talk about solutions, because it's the solutions that are always going to outweigh the problems in our society, the problem with people, the problem with dealing with traumatic experiences, and the problems with our mental health and mental well-being. And so many things that happened in the past affect us today.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a question of identity when you're black and dealing with trauma, because some of the specific things that we're trying to reconcile as black people from an identity standpoint is who we are, right? Just who we are is a persistent question of identity. And then outside of just who we are, how do we reconcile, am I that person to other people? And then, am I all I ought to be? Those are the core essential principles of black identity, right? And so in order to be healthy as a black person, you have to have a healthy black personality in order to navigate these things. But in society, there's no money to be made off of our healing. The money is made off of our pain.
Woo! Pain is money. And with that being said, this has been the Reclamation Point podcast. PTSD is real. And so whatever it is, PTSD, anxiety, we have to find a release, whether yoga, working out, just taking a minute to think about you, taking a minute to breathe, taking a minute to focus on your personal well-being.
Yeah.
You can't save the world, and I had to learn this. You cannot save the world. You cannot save your children. You can't save your mother. You can't save anyone that you love without saving yourself. Self-preservation is the most important form of love. I remember being taught this, and it was like, I died, something. I die for you. And some religious leader told me, like, you're not God. You're not built to die for anyone. When it's somebody else's time, it's their time. But you also have to remember you can't save anyone without saving yourself. So, with that being said, remember the most important person to you is you first. And that's take into account that we have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and be aware of what triggers you and start to personally design your own healing rituals, because all of us have a resilient story. All of us have strengths of how we overcome. And it's a trial and error process of trying to figure out what works for you. Sweet tea, music, talking to Mo, doing the podcast, those things are healing for me. But when you start to develop healing rituals and prioritize healing, that's how you develop coping strategies, by just prioritizing your own healing.
Right. And then with that being said, we want to thank you to U42 Studios. We want to thank you to our producer, David, who's been MIA. We don't know where he is. We want to thank you to everyone that has been supporting the Reclamation Point podcast. I want to personally thank my partner in crime, Dr. Ed Garnes. I'm Mr. Motown Lee. Follow me on all platforms. Motown, MOETOWNLEE. And my partner.
And follow me at Dr. Ed Garnes. I said that with more passion this time on all platforms. Wow. Dr. Ed Garnes.
And also follow the Reclamation Point podcast at Reclamation Point Podcast. Like, subscribe to the podcast. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. And we may take into account. Not really, but no, jokes.
We do. Y'all feedback does help us, frame episodes, so we appreciate it.
So this has been the PTSD version of the Reclamation Point podcast. Thank you, and we out.
Peace.